أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we approach the wilada of our 10th Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn Muhammad Al-Hadi, salawatullahi alayhi, I thought it would be beneficial to share an intriguing story from his life that I'm sure many of you have probably never heard. You know, when it comes to the later Imams of Ahlul Bayt, we know very little about their lives. Part of it is due to our own shortcomings. You know, we haven't devoted enough time to study and reflect on their lives. But the reality is also that there is very little about them because of the political conditions of their time. Imam Al-Hadi and Imam Al-Askari alayhimus salam in particular, because they were under house arrest, it was difficult for the Shia community to make direct contact with them. And therefore, the biographical material on the later Imams is quite limited compared to what we have about the earlier Imams. But nonetheless, we do have precious gems from their lives. Really fascinating stories that give us a window into the types of people that they were. And we can derive from these fascinating stories practical lessons, lessons that we can implement in our lives today. Now, the story that I want to share with you is a story about Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam and a Christian scribe. And this story is documented in our books of hadith. You know, for example, if you look at Allam al-Majlisi, he actually mentions this story and he quotes it from a much earlier source. He quotes it from a book called Al-Khara'ij wal-Jara'ih. This is a book that was authored by a Persian scholar, Qutbuddin al-Rawandi. He died in 573 after the Hijrah. So Allam al-Majlisi is citing a source that predates him by almost 500 years. Qutbuddin al-Rawandi, he writes this book, Al-Khara'ij wal-Jara'ih. And the theme of his book is that he chronicles miraculous stories relating to the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, and he addresses, some theological questions and misconceptions relating to those stories. Now, Qutbuddin al-Rawandi, he was a prolific scholar of our tradition. He was a student of Sheikh al-Tabrasi, the author of Tafsir Majma'ul Bayan. So this is a man with high scholarly credentials. Now, in his book, he mentions an interesting incident that took place during the life of Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam. Now, the narrator of the story is a man by the name of Hibatullah ibn Abi Mansur al-Musili. This is a man who lived in Mosul, present-day Iraq. He tells the following story. He says that there was a Christian scribe who was a friend of my father. The narration describes him. He was Katibun Nasrani. He was a Christian scribe. And usually people who had this occupation, they were employed by the government because, many people were still illiterate in this time. And the Abbasids used to employ non-Muslims in their government because they were suspicious of Muslims, and many Muslims did not want to work with them. So they used to employ non-Muslim government workers. So this man, he says that my father and this Christian scribe, they were friends. And the Christian scribe, his name was Yusuf ibn Yaqub. Yusuf ibn Yaqub. Now, he says, so he's narrating this story. He says that suddenly, Yusuf ibn Yaqub, this Christian scribe, friend of my father, unannounced, he suddenly shows up at our house, presumably in Mosul. He was probably in Baghdad. He suddenly shows up at a time that we did not expect to have any visitors. So my father asked him, ما شأنك قدمت في هذا الوقت? What's wrong? What's the story? Why are you showing up at this hour? Is everything okay? He says, دعيت إلى حضرة المتوكل. He says, I'm worried because Mutawakkil has summoned me. And when someone like Mutawakkil summons you, it's usually bad news. وَلَا أَدْرِي مَا يُرَادْ مِنِّي. And I don't know what he wants. I don't know what he's going to do. Because at that time, you're dealing with someone like Mutawakkil. Maybe someone filed a report, accused him of treason. So there is a legitimate fear. He doesn't know what is going to happen when he goes and sees Mutawakkil. He says, so I'm worried. إِلَّا أَنِّ اشْتَرَيْتُ نَفْسِي مِنَ اللَّهِ بِمِئَةِ دِينَارٍ. He says, but I've taken out insurance on myself. I took out 100 dinars sadaqah, right? Because sadaqah has a way of repelling calamities. وَقَدْ حَمَلْتُهَا لِعَلِي بْنِ مُحَمَّدْ إِبْنُ الرِّضَى عَلَيْهِمُ السَّلَامِ. This is a Christian scribe. He says, I have 100 gold coins that I want to give as charity, and I want to give it to Imam Al-Hadi so he can distribute it for me. Look at the level of trust. This is a Christian scribe who only trusts Imam Al-Hadi to be the one to distribute the funds to those who are in need. So the narrator, he says that my father was impressed by this idea. So he said to him, قَدْ وُفِّقْتُ فِي هَذَا. That this is a very blessed thing that you are going to do. That you're going to take 100 dinars and you're going to give it to Ali ibn Muhammad Al-Hadi alayhi salam. So, this man, he went, the Christian scribe, he goes to Samarra. And this is where Mutawakkil is based. He goes to Samarra, he spends a few days in Samarra, and then he returns to the house of his friend in Mosul. He comes back and he's joyful and he's happy. So, فَقَالَ لَهُ وَالِدِي. The narrator says, my father asked him, حَدِّثْنِي حَدِيثَك. Tell us what happened. Did you meet Imam Al-Hadi? You went to Samarra. It seems like everything went well. Tell us the story. He said, I went to Samarra. So in Samarra, Mutawakkil is there and Imam Al-Hadi is there. He says, I went to Samarra and I stayed at a house. At that time, there were no hotels. People used to just open their doors to travelers. He says, I was staying at a house and I had the money with me. I had 100 dinars with me. And I wanted to give this money to Imam Al-Hadi before my meeting with Mutawakkil. I wanted to give the sadaqah before I go and meet with Mutawakkil because it might be my last meeting. I want to make sure that I pay the sadaqah, so it's a type of insurance and protection for me, from Mutawakkil. He says, when I was in Samarra, I had no idea where Imam Al-Hadi lived. This was my first time in Samarra. It seems that most of his work was in Baghdad, in other places in Iraq. He says, my first time in Samarra, and I had no idea where the house of Imam Al-Hadi was. He says, I got the sense, I understood, فَعَرَفْتُ أَنَّ الْمُتَوَكِّلِ قَدْ مَنَعَهُ مِنَ الرُّكُوبِ وَأَنَّهُ مُلَازِمٌ لِدَارٍ. This Christian scribe probably went to some of the masajid hoping to see Imam Al-Hadi. Maybe Imam Al-Hadi is giving a sermon. After all, this is the grandson of the Prophet. He's a very well-known personality. He was nowhere to be found. He said that I then came to understand that Mutawakkil had banned Imam Al-Hadi from travel. There was a travel ban on Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam, and he was placed under house arrest. So now, Yusuf ibn Yaqub, this Christian scribe, is thinking to himself, okay, how am I going to find Imam Al-Hadi? So he thinks to himself that I can ask, but if I ask, it might alarm the government authorities. A Christian walking around Samarra asking, where is Ali ibn Muhammad Al-Hadi? It's too dangerous. So he said, I sat there and I was trying to think of a way to locate the house of Imam Al-Hadi. He says, فَفَكَّرْتُ سَاعَةً فِي ذَلِكَ. I sat there for some time, thinking and strategizing a clever way of discovering where Imam Al-Hadi lived. فَوَقَعَ فِي قَلْبِي. He says, then suddenly I had a thought. أَنْ أَرْكَبَ حِمَارِي. That, I came into the city riding my donkey. So I had this idea, let me get on my donkey. وَأَخْرُجْ فِي الْبَلَدِ وَلَا أَمْنَعَهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ يَذْهَبْ. Let me just get on the donkey and pray to Allah that the donkey guides me to the house of Imam Al-Hadi. I had nothing else to do. This idea came to my mind. He says, maybe the donkey will guide me to the doorstep of Imam Al-Hadi. He says, this was the only thing that I was able to do because it was too dangerous for me to ask. I mean, we have to reflect on this, brothers and sisters. Look at the political circumstances where even to ask, where is the house of Imam Al-Hadi? A Christian is afraid to ask that question, let alone a follower of Ahlul Bayt. So he says that I mounted my donkey, and the donkey is walking, taking me through the streets and through the marketplaces until suddenly, and Yusuf ibn Yaqub, he's accompanied by his servant. He has a servant with him who's walking beside him. The donkey suddenly stops in front of a door, a small house. He said, I said to my servant, knock on the door and ask, whose house is this? The servant went and he came back and he said, هذه دار ابن الرضا. That this is the house of the son of Ar-Ridha. Let me just explain, parenthetically here, that after Imam Al-Ridha, because Imam Al-Ridha was globally known, he was known throughout the Islamic empire, because he was the heir apparent of Ma'mun, because of his popularity, the later Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they were known as Ibn al-Ridha. Imam al-Jawad is called Ibn al-Ridha. Imam al-Hadi is called Ibn al-Ridha, and Imam al-Askari is also called Ibn al-Ridha. This was how popular Imam al-Ridha was. So the servant says, this is the house of the son of al-Ridha. So the Christian, he says, Allahu Akbar. Dilalatun wallahi muqna'a. God is great. What a sign. What a convincing sign this is. That I prayed to be guided to the house of Imam Al-Hadi and it happened. So he says, I knocked on the door. Yusuf ibn Yaqub, Christian scribe, he knocks on the door. He says, a black man, a black servant answered the door, and he said to me, أنت يوسف ibn Yaqub? He said to me, you are Yusuf ibn Yaqub? Yusuf ibn Yaqub, he says, I said to myself, هذه دلالة أخرى. This is a second sign. من أين عرف هذا الغلام اسمي? How did this servant know my name? وليس في هذا البلد من يعرفني. There is no one in the city who knows me. ولا دخلته قط. And I've never been to Samarra. How does he know my name? The servant then let me into the house. He says, I sat down in one of the rooms, and then he came to me and he said, give me the 100 dinars. Yusuf ibn Yaqub, he says, وَهَذِهِ ثَالِثَةً. This is a third sign. ثُمَّ رَجَعَ إِلَيْهِ. He took the money and he came to me, and then he said to me, enter the room. أدخل فدخلت إليه وهو في مجلسه وحده. He says, I entered the room and I saw Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam sitting by himself. Imam Al-Hadi, the Christian scribe, he says, he looked at me and he said to me, Ya Yusuf, O Yusuf, Ama ana lak? Isn't it now time for you to embrace Islam after what you have seen? Isn't it time for you to submit to the truth? فَقُلْتُ يَا مَوْلَاي, I said to him, my master, قَدْ بَانَ لِي مِنَ الْبُرْهَانِ مَا فِيهِ كِفَايَةً لِمَنْ اكْتَفَى. He says to the Imam, oh my master, I saw many wondrous signs that would be sufficient for anyone who is looking for the truth. Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam, he says to him, Hayhat, innaka la tuslim. Imam Al-Hadi, he says to him that, I know you're amazed by what happened, but you're not going to become a Muslim. This is just talk. You're having a euphoric moment. He says, you're not going to become a Muslim. وَلَكِنْ سَيُسْلِمُ وَلَدُكَ. But your son will become a Muslim. وَهُوَ مِنْ شِيعَتِنَا. And your son will be one of our devoted followers. And then Imam Al-Hadi, he says to this man, Ya Yusuf, inna aqwaman yaz'umuna anna wilayatana la tanfa'u amthalakum. Imam Al-Hadi, he says, O Yusuf, there are people who claim that our guardianship does not benefit people like you. That we only benefit our Shi'as. Imam then says, كَذَبُوا وَاللَّهِ, I swear by Allah that they are liars. إِنَّهَا لَتَنْفَعُ أَمْثَالَكَ. Our wilayah, the wilayah of Ahlul Bayt, it benefits everybody. It benefits even people like you who are not Muslim. إِمْضِ فِي مَا وَافَيْتَ. Go to Mutawakkil. فَإِنَّكَ سَتَرَى مَا تُحِبُّ. You will see something there that will please you. You will be safe. He says, the narrator says, that this Yusuf ibn Yaqub, who was a friend of my father, he told us the story. And the Imam made certain prophecies that this Christian scribe would not convert, he would remain upon Christianity, but his son would convert and become one of the staunch supporters of Ahlul Bayt. So he says, فَلَقِيتُ إِبْنَهُ بَعْدَ هَذَا. After some time, I visited the family of this Christian scribe, just to see, what happened. And he says, and I met his son. This was after the death of his father. And the narrator says, وَاللَّهِ وَهُوَ مُسْلِمٌ حَسُنَ التَّشَيُّعُ. I swear by God, I met the son of Yusuf ibn Yaqub, and by God, he is a Muslim, and he is an excellent follower of Ahlul Bayt. فَأَخْبَرَنِي. And the son told me, أَنَّ أَبَاهُ مَاتَ عَلَى النَّصْرَانِيَّةِ. The son told me that my father died upon Christianity. وَأَنَّهُ أَسْلَمَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِ أَبِي. And he told me that I converted to Islam after the death of my father. وَكَانَ يَقُولُ أَنَا بِشَارَةُ مَوْلَاي. He used to take pride in the fact that I am the glad tiding of Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Now, what do we learn from this story? It's a very beautiful story, but the point of these stories is not just so that we can memorize them and share them over dinner. There are things that we can learn, beneficial things that we can take from this story. The first lesson that we can learn is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sees a person sincere, a person who is sincere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide them in mysterious ways. You have a Christian who sincerely wants to meet Imam Al-Hadi. He doesn't have any ulterior motives. There are no nefarious intentions. If a person has ikhlas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show you the way. He will use sometimes unconventional means to guide you. And this is exactly what we see in the story. He had no idea where Imam Al-Hadi's house was. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the donkey, He guided him to the house of Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam. This is number one. The importance of sincerity in our pursuit of truth. Number two is that this story also highlights the knowledge of Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam. Our Imams, we don't see them as scholars and mujtahids. No. These are people who have been endowed with special knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them this superior knowledge because this is what reinforces their authority over us. That we turn to them for guidance because they have been gifted with this special knowledge. And this is not something that is new. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He tells us that He has gifted this type of knowledge to prophets and to saints of the past. If you look at, for example, the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the knowledge of the unseen that was possessed by Isa ibn Maryam. If you look at Surah Ali Imran, ayah 49, Isa ibn Maryam, he says, وَأُنَبِّئُكُمْ بِمَا تَأْكُلُونَ. I can inform you of the food that you ate. I can tell you, yesterday you ate this morning you ate that. He has this ilm al-ghayb. وَمَا تَدَّخِرُونَ فِي بُيُوتِكُمْ. Not only was Isa ibn Maryam able to tell people in detail about the food that they consumed, he says, I can even tell you what you have stored in your home. إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. The third lesson that we learn from this story is the universality of their wilayah. Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they're not just a mercy for the Shias. They're not just a mercy for Muslims. All of humanity benefits from the presence of these Imams. Sometimes we treat them as, a gift that Allah only gave to us. And we're very possessive over the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, as if Allah sent them especially for us. But here, in this story, Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam shows that even those who are outside of the faith, they can benefit from the blessings of this house. And if you look at Az-Ziyaratul Jami' Al-Kabira, which was composed by Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam, look at the way he teaches us to address the family of the Prophet. Assalamu alaykum, assalamu ala mahal ma'rifatillah. Peace be upon the place, the location to gain knowledge of God. You want to know who Allah is? No one is going to give you a more accurate description of God than the Prophet and his immaculate family. You want ma'rifatullah? That's where you have to go. Assalamu ala mahalli ma'rifatillah wa masakini barakatillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of all blessings. But Allah Azza wa Jal, He has stored His blessings. He has settled His blessings in this household. So the way that you gain and you derive these divine blessings, it comes through the medium of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, whether people realize it or not. Because Imam Al-Hadi in that same ziyarah teaching us how to address Ahlul Bayt, he says, وَبِكُمْ يُنَزِّلُ الْغَيْثِ. It's because of you, O Ahlul Bayt. It's because of you that Allah sends down rain. وَبِكُمْ يُمْسِكُ السَّمَاءَ أَن تَقَعَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِهِ. And it is because of you that the sky does not collapse upon the earth. The entire universe functions because of your presence. Because the purpose of creation is what? وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah says, I did not create jinn and human beings except that they worship me. And the only ones who are the perfect embodiment of worship, the only ones are the Prophet and his family. Without them, the goal of creation is not achieved. So it is through their presence that we reap all of these blessings. So this story highlights the universality of their wilayah. And number 4, we see this idea of intergenerational influence. It's not random that the son of this Christian scribe became a follower of Ahlul Bayt. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this father the tawfiq of having a son who was on the path of Ahlul Bayt because of the respect he showed to Imam Al-Hadi alayhi salam. Sometimes our actions as parents, they have a huge influence on what our children receive in terms of material and spiritual gifts. And I'll end with this. Many of us are familiar with the story of Musa and Khidr. And we know about those 3 mysterious actions. Among them was that he erected a wall that was about to collapse for a village that denied him food when he asked for food, when he asked to be hosted. And this is something that even Musa could not understand. Why are you doing all of this manual labor for people who are so stingy and greedy? Musa alayhi salam, in Surah Al-Kahf, ayah 82, he explains, وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. That wall, that structure, it belonged to 2 orphans, 2 boys. وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا. And beneath that structure, there was a treasure. If the wall collapsed, the treasure would have been exposed. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And their father, and the narrations say, the father that Khidr is referring to is a father that goes back 7 generations. Because their father was righteous, Allah sent me to look after their property. So sometimes what we do in our lives, maybe what we are doing today, maybe because you are attending the majlis of Imam Al-Hadi today, maybe 2-3 generations, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put a very pious person in your progeny. Maybe a scholar will emerge from your progeny. So we shouldn't underestimate any of the good that we do. And this story also illustrates the power of sadaqah. Imam, he affirmed the power of sadaqah. That if you give sadaqah, even someone like mutawakkil cannot harm you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us and guide us and illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi al-tahirin.